You know, I'm tired of getting shocked with people's stupidity. And why am I saying that? Because I was just on Instagram and I saw a post about Brazil's economy, and I was stunned by how many people in the comments were saying that Brazil is in good economic shape, that Brazil is doing well. I mean, you must know nothing about economics to say that. For example, people are celebrating that inflation closed last year, 2024, at only 4.8%, which for me is a lot, while GDP has grown about 3.6%. But to celebrate that is crazy because, first, if inflation closed 2024 at 4.8%, this means that it came much higher than the central bank's target of 3%. In other words, this means that Brazil has lost control of inflation, even with interest rates at 12%. Besides, as I've said, people are also commemorating that Brazil's GDP is expected to grow about 3.6%. But again, that's far from being a victory. I mean, I don't think people are doing the math properly, because if inflation went up 4.8% and your GDP went up less than that, this means that the country is not growing. Instead, this means that the country is retracting. But the picture gets much worse if we think about Brazil's GDP in dollar terms, because while Brazil's GDP is expected to grow only 3.6% in 2024, the Brazilian real, the Brazilian currency, has lost almost 30% of its value against the dollar in the same period. So if we were talking about Brazil's GDP growth in dollars, we would be talking about a massive contraction of more than 20%. I mean, that certainly doesn't sound like economic success, right? Besides, much of this GDP growth we've seen can be attributed to increased government spending. You see, it's actually pretty easy to pump up GDP because the GDP takes into account the government spending. So the more the government spends, the more the GDP increases. And that's clearly a trap, because to artificially increase GDP, the government can simply take a lot of debt and decide to spend tons of money building cities in the middle of nowhere, for example, just like China did. And even though no one lives in those cities, even though they are useless, as they costed a lot, as the government spent a lot on that, this means that GDP went up. Great, right? Now, if you think that's completely idiotic, come on, hit the like button. And that's idiotic because progress is not made by building useless things. If the government decides to spend its money on a useless project, the GDP may indeed go up. But at the end of the day, the result will be just a waste of resources. That's the truth. The important thing is not to just spend money, but to invest in projects and ideas and things that will aggregate value to people's lives. But Brazil is doing exactly that, pumping up GDP through public spending. As I've already shown here on my channel, the Brazilian government is currently spending as it did during the pandemic, running huge deficits while public debt is also increasing. But there is no guarantee that this public spending will actually benefit the population. Actually, probably all this money will be spent and the people won't get any return from that. My point is, even though Brazil's GDP went up, I don't know if that's a good thing, because as it was largely driven by the government's reckless spending, this growth ends up being artificial and lacks quality. But anyway, there are people who really believe that Brazil is on the right path to economic success. And from what I've seen, people also like to say that Brazil is doing great because our unemployment rate is low, currently standing at only 6.1%. So if we look at it that way, Brazil actually doesn't seem to be doing so badly, right? The thing is that we need to take a closer look here, because a lot of people are excluded from this data. Because first, it doesn't include people who have given up looking for a job. And I know many people in this situation because they've spent months, even years, sending their CVs, but as there was no positive response, well, they just gave up, right? Now, here's the trick, because if you stop looking for a job, after 30 days only, you are not considered unemployed anymore. Instead, you were classified as out of the workforce. But you are not unemployed anymore, okay? It's a very semantic thing. And here's another important point for us to understand. You see, Brazil has 54 million people receiving government aid, the so-called Bolsa Família. In some states, there are more people on the government's payroll than people working. I'm not kidding. For example, in this image, in the orange states, we have more people receiving Bolsa Família than people actually working. And often, since wages in Brazil are very low, it simply doesn't pay off to work. And I'm sure you were surprised to hear that a lot of these people spend more than 30 days without looking for a job. And that's how we have such a low unemployment rate. That's our secret. They are not unemployed. They are just out of the workforce. That's why when we look at Brazil's labor market, according to the government's own website, this is what we see. The number of unemployed people, which is this red slice here, is actually pretty small. Now take a look at the number of people considered out of the workforce. 66 million. The blue slice represents those who are currently working, and the gray slice represents those who are too young to work. So as we can see, though Brazil has indeed few unemployed people, we have a lot of people considered out of the workforce. But then you might say, but there must be a lot of retirees included there, right? And yes, that's true. Brazil has 23 million retirees. So 66 minus 23 equals 43. This means that 43 million people are out of the workforce, excluding retirees, which represents almost 20% of the Brazilian population. So maybe, just maybe, this 6.1% unemployment rate we are currently seeing might not be reflecting reality so well. So as you can see, Brazil is not okay. It may appear okay on paper, but it is not. But for me, it's just unbelievable that a lot of people really think that everything is fine here in Brazil. My impression is that those who still haven't realized that Brazil is sinking will only understand it when the ship is already at the bottom of the ocean. Only then they will understand that the situation is not favorable. And I will tell you more. Not only is Brazil not doing well, but soon it may enter a recession. But that's a topic I will leave for another video. So don't forget to subscribe. Until then, I recommend you watch this video here about how Brazil is on the verge of becoming the next Turkey. Well, that's it for today. See you next time.